Welcome to the DesignerUp podcast, helping you level up your design and development skills. I'm your instructor and host, Elizabeth Alley, and this is the first episode in our Mindful Design and Interaction series. Today, we're talking about mental health, particularly how it manifests in tech, and about the stigmas and myths that prevail amongst high-functioning individuals as well as diverse populations. Our guest today is Dr. Munn Saechao. Dr. Munn is a mental health professional from the Bay Area and a dear friend of mine. In her 12 years in the mental health field as both a clinical psychologist and social worker, she has helped individuals to uncover and change unwanted patterns and behaviors and unlock their full potential. Her background and lived experience as a child of refugees has motivated her to work with diverse populations, particularly people of color, children and adolescents, and women in professional roles. She advocates for mental well-being against the pervasive myths and stigmas that often affect these populations. Moreover, she aims to illuminate the importance of self-care, especially for those that are considered high-functioning and may not consider or think to attend to their mental state of health. You can learn more about Dr. Munn and her practice at drmunn.com. That's drmunn.com. And follow her on Instagram at dr.munn. Dr. Munn, thank you so much for sharing your time and knowledge with us today. So, Dr. Munn, tell us, how did you get into the field of psychology?
Okay, that's a hard question, and the reason why it's a hard question is because, I have to think about sort of like who I am, and I think that question, like who are you, and like how did you evolve, is like a really big question, right? And so, how did I get into the field of psychology? I have to go back to ask that question of who am I?
Yeah, it's a huge arc to cover, but like,
right.
Was there an impetus or maybe a moment when you decided or were thinking about a career or what you wanted to do or your purpose?
You know, it's funny because I don't know if I necessarily had the vision of becoming a psychologist, so, but what I did know is that I was always curious. Like, I was the kind of child who always asked why, right? Why this? Why that? Like, what I'm seeing, like, why that? And so when I think about my childhood, I just saw a lot between my family, like my parents, and just like dynamics, and noticing that there was just a lot of anxiety. And I didn't know at the time back then that it was anxiety, but there was a lot of conflict, and I always wanted to know why and what's going on and what's precipitating that, right? So the question of why never left me, and that sort of kind of persisted, and in me wanting to have answers for things about how people like come to be who they are, right?
Right.
And so
so it was like the nature of things that you were curious about, right? The origination of these things. Like, but that's some really good insight, because you noticed yourself asking that when you were younger, and that was really the way that you thought and saw the world, is looking for answers.
Exactly.
Looking for reasoning behind actions and behaviors and the things that you saw around you. So tell me about that. Like, what was your upbringing? What was your family? What's your background? Like your
you want to go
background?
In, Liz? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
okay, so so like, I think one of my earliest memories that I have of my parents interacting, and I grew up in a pretty high conflict household, so there was always tension. My parents were always stressed. There was just a lot of worries. A lot of worries. And I saw this and I witnessed it, but I couldn't understand what was going on. I just knew inside my heart and my gut that something wasn't right. And I remember when I was very young, I think it was probably 5 around this time, and back then, this is like what, if I was 5, like early 90s, the way in which my family communicated with the rest of the family in Laos was through videotapes. So they would record Like rather than write
wow.
letters,
Oh, wow.
they would record narratives about their day-to-day life.
So it was like early FaceTime.
Yeah, sort of. And then
video chatting.
Yeah, you're recording on cassette, right?
Oh,
cassette.
audio. Okay.
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
Cassette, and then you send it over to Laos, and who knows how long it takes. And so that was the way in which they exchanged. That's how they stayed connected with family.
That's amazing.
In Laos. And I remember, my parents recording, and they both did it. My dad, my mom.
So cool.
Yeah, and on the recordings, like they would just weep. You know?
Yeah.
Just weep. My mom would weep, my dad would weep, and I would sit there outside of like the door, the door, and I would watch and listen. And I didn't know what was going on, but I could feel their pain.
Yeah.
Like I felt it in my gut and in my belly, and
Right.
and like seeing my parents in that state of like suffering was so hard for me at the time, being so young. And I was generally a very sensitive child. So like I was very responsive to the different feelings that my family were going through. So if they felt something, I felt it.
You have that empathic quality.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that was just a quality about me, I think.
Right.
And I was highly impacted by them, right? Because I was so sensitive, and I would take in, and that I would hold that in my body, in my heart, in my mind, and that actually began to impact me. So as a child, looking back, like I was a pretty depressed child and a very anxious child, and at the time I didn't know where that was coming from or what was going on, but like looking back, I took in a lot of what my parents and my family were experiencing. And part of the reason why they were so stressed is because, they're refugees.
Yeah. So tell us like about what is your, your background, like your heritage,
So I am Yumian. That's like the formal name, or Mian. So Mian or Yumian. And I'm also Khmu as well, but I identify more with my Mian heritage. That's the language that I speak. So Mian is my primary language, my first language.
Right.
And so, my parents are refugees from Laos, and during the Laos Civil War, they had to flee their country, so they traveled 10 days, by foot, like really just kind of on a whim to the refugee camps in Thailand. And they just took what they could carry, which was the kids. So let's see. So there's 7 of us. It's like we have a big family, right?
That's
3
huge.
of us were born here in the United States, and the 4 oldest were born in Laos and Thailand. And so at that time when they were traveling from Laos to Thailand, there were the 3 oldest siblings. So 3 kids. My parents had 3 kids at that time, and I think like my dad had like one of the kids, in front, my mom did, and then like they had rice on the back, right? So they were just carrying whatever they could carry is what they brought with them. And so 10 days they just fled, and they traveled by night. I think they traveled by night, and then during daytime they just sort of camped out. So they just, didn't know what was going to happen, and
I can't imagine the incredible worry, the burden that they brought along with them, like, and how that does not leave you. That's a traumatizing experience that, and it's a mentality and it's a perception that you see the world with from that point on, it's that's a heavy thing. So you can definitely see where their tendencies would come from and what that environment would have been like.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when they got to the refugee camps, they were there for several years.
Wow.
Until they could get sponsorship to come to the United States, and they didn't know English, and they couldn't read or write. And when they were able to come here, my parents first landed in Southern California, and then my sister was born shortly after. So my mom was pregnant when she was traveling. Had my sister,
oh my gosh,
who's a year older than me, and then shortly after had me, and then moved up to Northern California where the rest of our family were. So they went to where community was.
Right. She sounds like an extremely tough, resilient woman.
Yeah, that is my mom. She is
Wow.
so tough. Like,
Wow.
she's so tough. It's crazy how I definitely get that from her.
Yeah.
So that was on their mind, and like I think about the kind of work that I do now. I'm like, why am I doing like trauma work, right?
Yeah.
There's something about me and my history which pulls me in that direction. Like at the time, it wasn't very conscious, but when I look back and reflect on sort of how did I sort of land where I land, it's like it's everything that I went through to influence me to get me to where I am right now. And so my parents, they just suffered, even siblings, through tremendous trauma, even to this day, where like it affects them. You know, it hasn't been processed.
Right. And I see that, and I hear these stories from immigrant families, from people who have gone through those similar situations. And like, you know, it was a similar story with my family's background. Like, they're from Guyana. The Indian people were originally brought there as indentured servants from India and from Africa. So there was a mix of blacks and browns in that background. And then it was a hard life. And when they came here, I mean, in Guyana, they didn't really have much of anything. It was a very like Amazonian jungle kind of lifestyle. And coming here and having the ability to have things, they still hoarded things. They still had this feeling of lack. They were always coming from a feeling of lack, because that's what they knew. And anxiety and worry, like lots of worrying over things that, you know, they can't control, or, you know, they don't understand. So like in your experience with, you know, diverse populations, with immigrants and that sort of thing, how do you see them viewing mental health issues? I know there's so many stigmas. There's so much resistance to it. What do you think makes it so difficult for them to look for help, or to even consider that that is an option, that you can take care of your mental health, or it should be addressed?
I think in a lot of cultures, mental health isn't even a thing, for lack of a better term. Like, it's not, like, what is mental health? Like, that term doesn't even exist, right? And so then when you're trying to promote something to an individual or a family who hasn't been brought up to even consider that, it's hard to, I think, even have a narrative around that, right? So it's like introducing a new concept. And I think in a lot of cultures, like Asian culture specifically, where you know, they may, like, individuals and families may not report mental health symptoms like depression, sadness, but they'll report things like, I feel a lot of pain in my body, right? And so then it gets somaticized. So that's the other thing too, is that, like, it's trying to find a common language, right? So because to some degree, all of us will experience depression at some points in our lives. It's just, how do we talk about it? And so if we grow up in a culture where that's talked about, right, then it's normalized to a certain degree. So it's easier to kind of seek mental health services because you've been exposed to it. But I think in many cultures, you know, it's like psychology. Like, what is it? That, like, there is no psychology in Mien. Like, what is that? So the other thing is, like, how do I even explain my job to my family, right? And so the way that I do it, and this, it's like, you can't translate it directly, but the way that I've explained it to my parents is that, okay, so I am a doctor, and so what I do is I help people to, like, heal their mind and their heart.
That's a great explanation.
Right.
And their heart.
And then my parents get it. They're like, oh. And then I'll give examples. Like, for example, like, if someone is grieving, experience a loss, and they start to feel sad, unmotivated. So my job is to help them to get through that difficult time. Right. And so then it's like, then that's digestible. That's in a way where they can understand it and take that in. Like, oh, so you're trying to help people. Yeah, everybody goes through grief and loss at some point. That makes sense. As opposed to saying that, like, oh yeah, I'm a psychologist, and right, like, nobody knows what that, I mean, not nobody, but like, it's like, who, that term doesn't exist in every culture.
Yeah, that high level concept does not necessarily exist, or that role doesn't
Right.
exist. And that is interesting because it is about finding a common language. It's about finding how to, communicate that to
Right.
someone on their terms, how they would understand it.
And to normalize it, right? That everyone could benefit from mental health services.
I think it's very taboo in immigrant culture, to even talk about your feelings on that level, or to, that's just considered a weakness, or, you don't do that. You don't complain, you don't, there's so much about that that's just unacceptable to a lot of cultures. So it's just, bringing that to light and saying, we all experience these things. There are mechanics and methods in which we can deal with them internally.
Yes, absolutely. I know, when I'm listening to you speak, what comes to mind is just this idea of crying, right? In terms of expressing emotion, right? So the way that I'll explain it to parents sometimes is I'll say, let's take the example crying, right? People have their own ideas and notions about what it means to cry, right? Some people might say they're okay, if I cry, then it's a form of weakness, right? And someone might say, oh no, when you cry, it shows vulnerability, it shows strength, right?
Right.
And then I'll say, there's a reason why we all cry. Crying is a human emotion. So that means that all of us have capacity to cry, and that all of us have feelings, and that it's okay, but that there's something about the larger culture that sort of has influenced who can cry and who can't in what situations. But just to normalize it, actually, you have tears.
Yeah.
It's there's a reason.
So you were just talking about how we all cry. It's something we all experience. Sadness, it's a part of the human condition.
That's right.
And I wonder about these common emotions that we all feel and how we deal with them. I feel like my personal view of psychotherapy before I ever went to a therapist was that I have to be severely, distressed or have mental issues, that I had a lot of stereotypes around abuse or, serious depression, really terrible crippling anxiety, that sort of thing. But that's not necessarily all that therapy is about. And I think that we also have a stigma in society about what level of suffering we need to be in before we ask for help. What would you call individuals like that, and what's your experience clinically with that stereotype?
What's the stereotype again? Sorry.
Just that you have to be severely mentally ill, or that barrier to seeking help. If you don't think your level of suffering is something that you need to be seeking help for.
Yeah, I think the way I think about psychotherapy is very similar to the way I think about seeing a medical provider, right? It's all of us, it's recommended that we all see a medical provider once a year to get a regular checkup, just to make sure we're healthy and well and, capable generally, right? And so that's also how I see psychotherapy too, in a sense, right? In the way that we go to see a medical provider to check up our sort of biological functioning. And so there's a way in which, because of some of the things that we talked about, stigma and so forth, where we don't seek mental health support to sort of check on our mental health, right?
Right.
It's we attend to our body, but why are we not attending to our mind and our heart?
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that it's really important to really get in touch with that part of ourselves. And so this can serve everyone. We all have a mind, we all have feelings, we have a heart, we're impacted day to day, we all have problems, we all have issues, and we would all benefit from seeking support.
Absolutely.
And so just to have someone be present with us, to check in with us, to slow down, right? To really pause and reflect on what's happening internally. And so, everyone could benefit from that. So regardless of the severity of symptoms, right? And so it would serve everyone.
And how do, some of these, I know they sometimes refer to them as like high functioning individuals. Give us an example of who that might be and how you've worked with them in your practice.
So tell me about you.
That's good. Flip the script. So I mean, I haven't had what I would consider like severe depression or severe anxiety, but I've had moments of all of these things. And I always thought that it was a weakness because I wasn't diagnosed with a mental health disorder. So if I couldn't figure out how to deal with this, and I was just not doing a very good job of figuring out my problems. Asking for help was admitting some kind of problem that I didn't think I had. So it was also that, and just seeing it like I don't deserve therapy really, because there are people that are really sick, and I don't need to be taking up some therapist's time with the fact that I'm sad today because I failed an exam or whatever it was happening at the time when I was in school. So it was a combination of like, or I didn't want to spend money on that. I needed to take care of my physical health more. I think, at least in the Western world, that is a real top priority, like our physical fitness, our, our diets, all these other externalized things. And I didn't really want to, or think it was beneficial to look internally at that point, at least when I was younger and in high school. So I think, especially in my industry, in the tech world, we're all pretty intelligent, high functioning. A lot of us are building products or working for companies and dealing with so much on the inside that we hide and that we never talk about. And
Yeah, absolutely. And I flipped the script because I think you are the perfect example of what a high functioning individual is, right? Totally capable, get things done, self-starter, intelligent, reflective, expressive, right? And you like live day to day, and you have goals, you complete your goals, so forth. Yet at the same time, there's a certain level of stress that you experience, right, in the day-to-day living. Right? And so that's what a high functioning individual would look like you, right? But it's like you're doing generally well for the most part, right? But then you might have some challenge in your life, right? And it could be related to work, could be related to family, medical stuff that impacts us emotionally and maybe interferes with some other aspect of our life, right? And so then if we sought treatment, right, seeing a therapist, that person could help us in that specific area so that we can just improve overall in the rest of our areas.
No, it's really true, because until I started exploring that and seeking therapy for myself, I did not realize that some of these things that bothered me about my life, or things that I considered that kept happening to me, were actually things I was attracting to myself based on patterns that I couldn't recognize necessarily, and things that I was constantly doing, or behaviors that I wasn't really putting under the microscope, and then trying to intentionally and continuously practice on. And I think one of the weirdest things I realized too was that I wasn't always really clear on the difference between when I was thinking something and when I was feeling something. Those two things had kind of become, conflated or divorced in certain cases, because sometimes, I would, feel a certain way, but it was really just because I was thinking about it in a certain way, and changing my perception changed my feelings, changing how I thought about things. And I think these are just kind of mechanisms that we don't necessarily learn when we're younger. and we don't prioritize them, and we don't give them the proper attention or weight that they need.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
things in my external world that I was blaming for certain experiences that I was having changed when I started to change myself and my behaviors, but it took someone helping me realize that before I could, and then the external world sort of started to fall away or fall into place as it needed to. So it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like an active action that I think we're so used to going after and striving for in our modern busy world, but it does start to shape your reality. I agree. Even if you feel like you're having just run-of-the-mill everyday stressors, you can really benefit, because you'll be surprised at, if you think it's just an external thing, how much the internal can affect it.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's how wonderful that you allowed yourself to experience that. First off, like, it takes tremendous courage to even seek out counseling, right? So if you grew up in a culture where psychotherapy doesn't exist or is stigmatized, and you do it, like, just thinking about that step, like just the potential tension and internal conflict, right, of what it means to seek out mental health services. And, Liz, you did it. And in the process, you learned so much. Like, you learned to differentiate thoughts with feelings. And then you didn't mention behaviors, but that's there too,
definitely,
right?
all in there.
And then thinking about the way in which you interact with the external world, right? And so it's like how that impacts you, how you impact the external world, that psychotherapy is so complex, right? We go in there for one reason, and then we leave just with so much more than we had expected, right?
Yeah.
And so you went through this process of introspection, right? It's like you slow down. Most people don't even do that. Like, they don't even pause to think about what they just said or how that landed for someone else, right?
Exactly.
So, like, if you are in psychotherapy, like, I applaud you, because again, it takes so much courage to just sit there and face yourself.
Oh, that is so true. It does.
Right? Because it's like, that's what you're doing. It's almost like the psychotherapist is like putting up a mirror and then like helping you to see things clearer.
It's so true.
And with that being said, like, I don't know about you, but like for me, when I look in a mirror, it's like I start noticing these blemishes, these flaws, and it's like, why would you subject yourself to that, right? And like, why? It's like, things are like, I don't know if I want to see all of that, right?
Oh, exactly. I was like, do I want to dig up something? Like, I'm okay. I'm fine. I don't need to go digging up any weird shit from my past. But it's very true, and that's such a good point.
Right. And and if we don't dig it up, right? If we don't have an awareness of where this is all coming from, it's like, then things won't change.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's like, then we find ourselves in these same patterns of behaviors that are maladaptive, not adaptive.
Yes.
And then we're like, I don't know why things aren't changing. Why am I so frustrated, right? And so it's like, maybe it's time to have someone just to kind of, put a mirror up and just kind of reflect and just like, let's just pause. Right?
Absolutely.
So
I think, we talk a lot about our achievements, like at the gym, like how many reps we put in and how much we, were able to do there. But I don't think anyone says like, man, therapy was like good today. Like, I faced myself today. I lifted some heavy thoughts and feelings. What about those things? What about those mental objects that we lift and push and like are able to deal with? I think that's just as fun and exciting and important. And I think, I want to help break that stigma that people can't talk about this stuff, or that you're broken somehow because you're seeking mental health. Help.
Right. Yeah. And aren't we all broken to some degree?
Absolutely.
Right?
That's something to acknowledge.
Too, right? Like, we all got issues.
We have. That's just part of us being human.
Exactly. So. Like, we all got problems. We're all dealing with stuff. Right? Even if on the outside, like, everything's going well, things just look amazing, but you never know what someone's going through internally.
Exactly.
Right?
And I mean, obviously, this is been said time and again, but social media is a big catalyst for like why that has been so pervasive in our culture. And I mean, I think that we hear a lot of talk right now about like millennials being the burnout generation, and we have, issues with tech addiction and all kinds of things that go along with that. And, as a product designer myself, being mindful of that is really important, because we've seen kind of what happens when you aren't, when you're reckless with people's privacy and their data, and you make addictive products that cause, kids to have anxiety and depression and all of these other things. So how do you think that kind of tech might be contributing to that, or what we can do to kind of mitigate some of that's happening with social media and the internet? And
so to me, like, way I'm understanding the question is, how does sort of how does that influence mental health?
Yeah.
Right. And
right.
So in working with kids who are always on screens, right? Like what are the implications to
exactly.
that? And so, and I don't know if I have all the answers, but just in terms of like where I mentioned to you the other day that I think there's a way in which it can increase isolation. And the other thing too is just the increase of cyberbullying, right?
That's a huge topic there.
And also the way in which people or young people express their need for help. It's like on social media.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, it's not even necessarily through human contact anymore.
Yeah.
But there's a way in which we're more isolated, but yet also more connected.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, and I don't know what this all means, like long term, how this is going to affect the overall psyche, because I think as humans, we need to be connected to each other. Yeah. Like there's something about sitting with another person right in front of them, having a conversation, sharing a meal, versus sitting in front of a screen. And like, I'm all for like technology and all of that. And at the same time, it is very different to sit with another human being.
Yeah. I think it's about balance, I think the more that tech, permeates our lives, we do have to think about, and be mindful of advocating for a human connection for ourselves, trying to get out, trying to connect with people. And therapy is a great way to do that in a really safe environment, a comfortable, supportive setting. And it's just one more way that we can connect, like not only with ourselves, but with another human being that can empathize with us. And I think that balance is kind of what you're hinting at, that we don't really know. I mean, tech is actually helping us to be exposed to the ideas of mental health. I mean, we can look these things up now, and we can ask for help. We can find good therapists, and I think that's a benefit of technology, but definitely being mindful of, the balance of how much we use it and how we use it and how we make products that affect people's mental health.
Right. And does it take the place of human contact, right? Because it's so easy to just get lost. Because I'm like that, right? Easily just like sucked into just content on the phone or online, and then it's like, who needs to check in and have coffee?
Right.
Like I just spent so much time just sort of like following someone, right? So I think you said the term mindful, and I think that's a really important concept, because we have to be intentional about connecting with others outside of the social media, right? So we have to be intentional about turning off our computers. We have to be intentional about going on that walk outside, right? And connecting with nature and be a human, right?
Yes.
And so if we don't make the time, then we just allow ourselves to be more isolated. Yeah. And then we become robotic. Yeah. Before you know it, it's like...
It is amazing how that face-to-face connection enriches your spirit. It enriches your energy on a different level. Like we could have easily conducted this interview over the phone.
Yep. Totally.
You know, after you've just come off of an 11-hour shift in your clinical work, but you made the time to come
Absolutely.
to talk to me face to face so that we can hug and you know, and connect and just share a meal and then have a real conversation.
That's true.
And it's not easy. And it does take, you know, conscious effort to do, but it can really be worth it. And the insights that you can gain from someone and the energy that you can get it can be really life-changing. It can change your day, you know?
Yeah, so I know when I first got here, like you had made a comment about my energy, and then I was talking about the client that I saw, like I just love working with this client, and I get energized through the process, but I also felt something, and I didn't mention it because I think we just sort of reared off, which is that like I was excited to come see you actually, and so there was a lot of enthusiasm around seeing Liz. So it's like, so that also fueled my energy, like so speaking to what we're talking about, which is like human connection, there's a way in which it's like something gets like transmitted, you know, through just connection, human connection, and it's like this bouncing back and forth of energy that gets exchanged that may or may not necessarily get exchanged online. So that's like very different.
It is. It's very different. It's different, and I think everything has its place and its proportion, and to be aware of it, to try to always be aware of that balance. So I have one last question for you, and that is just, what is one bit of mental health advice that you think is really important in the times that we're living in right now? You know, if you could say something to kind of everyone out there, you know, especially the diverse populations and the high functioning individuals and the ones that may not think to seek therapy, what could you kind of leave them with to think about?
I think we all could benefit from support. Like everyone needs help, and it's okay at the end of the day.
And I honestly think, in my experience, it can be pretty fun too. It can really be interesting to kind of have these eureka moments about yourself. You know, it's just like discovering something, and it can be quite interesting. So I don't think it needs to be something that's scary either, or that you have to be afraid of. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with just giving it a try.
Exactly. Giving it a
try.
Yeah. I think, and we deserve it. That's the thing.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
I think everyone deserves the opportunity to be listened to be heard, to be understood. At the end of the day, like, I think that is what every human being wants. And so what a gift I feel as a psychologist that I can give to all of my clients and their families.
Absolutely.
You know?
And it's a great gift to give to yourself and know that you're deserving of. So on that note, wise words from Dr. Munn. Thank you very, very much for spending your
Liz.
time
This
with
was
us.
like fun, and I love you, you know.
I love you. All right.
Thank you all for spending the last 40 minutes with us. If you enjoyed that, come back and check out more content like this as we continue our mindful design and interaction series. And if you want to learn more about the hard and soft skills of designing mindful products, sign up for our course at DesignerUp.co.